What is an insult? You might say also, what is a narcissistic wound? And why do some people fight for their honor? Why did some people, especially in the past, in this country, some other countries too, surely, challenge someone else to a duel? Why do certain countries go to war for, quote, patriotic reasons, or join up with the military in their own country for, quote, patriotic reasons? Why? Why was Abe Lincoln, former president at one time, challenged to a duel after someone else felt insulted when Lincoln wrote pamphlets about the man anonymously and spread them in town? And the other person found out who had written them and challenged Lincoln to a duel. It was called off at the last moment. Well, all talk of the word narcissism and narcissistic wound aside, which I believe has special complications, I think when we talk of being insulted, or when we talk about wanting self-respect also, or giving it to others, I believe what we really want, deep down, almost more than anything, is to believe that we are basically made a certain way, or are a certain way at any point in time by the laws of the universe, and thus blame-free in a moral sense. Now that doesn't mean that mankind's best means of controlling noxious influences by some upon others, you might say, call it criminality if you define it properly, is to apply the law in a sanctioned form. And yet, to claim at the same time that a person could help who they are, regardless of the resources given them and the constraints upon them, the laws of the universe in general, cause and effect, the laws of physics, call it what you will, would be inaccurate at best, I would put it. So we need constraints, we need so-called punishments, again, in terms of cause and effect. You do this, this might happen to you. And yet at the same time, we're constrained by the realities that we may not have the resources to have something turn out the way we wish it would. And to have someone tell us otherwise can hurt terribly, especially if we don't have the wherewithal, intellect, time, and more to sort through the words used that convince us all too easily that we could have been who we aren't, and something have not happened the way it did. So thus to be insulted in our mind, to feel insulted at any rate, in my mind, is to consider ourselves a criminal in the sense of we could have done otherwise if only. And my only response then to that would be to reframe things sometimes, at least in our own head, and say, well, if I'm a so-called criminal in the sense that I could have done otherwise, well then maybe the accuser ought to be answering the question in their head, why didn't they solve world hunger? Or why did we have COVID? Or why don't we solve completely our infrastructure problems and our prison problems? Why do we still have cancer of various sorts? For a person to say, you could have done better, and at the same time to exempt themselves from the same claim, to me, begs a big question here. And the person on the bottom end, so to speak, or the one end who is told, you could have done better, you are a, quote, criminal of some sort, in my mind, is going to feel thus insulted all too easily, unless they're an uncommon bird sometimes. At least that's my perspective. And that's then why we see all too often People getting riled up all too easily over words, accusations, quote, dirty looks, and more. Rejection galore sometimes. We don't want to feel that we didn't do the best we could, basically speaking, that being a phrase, given what we were handed, and the laws of the universe in general. We're not magicians, we're not Houdinis, we can't pull a rabbit out of a hat that's empty. And to be told otherwise, in most people's minds, is going to result in their, quote, feeling insulted, or their honor besmirched, whatever phraseology we're going to call it. You might even refer then to this being called ego wounding. Maybe our ego in part has to do a lot with a sense that we are constrained, and if we're told otherwise, we're going to have problems in our mind reconciling this. Thoughts here. And this then is why I believe the following examples can be mustered in service of this problem. John Osseroff, who got involved with the law for various petty crimes as a child, now quite wealthy in the financial sense, stated it took one rare bird individual telling him things he needed to hear about his true worth. This man was described as exceptionally kind. Also, in the movie Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon was told at least 5 times at one point by his, quote, therapist Robin Williams that words to the effect of, it's not your fault. In other words, according to the laws of the universe, things couldn't have turned out any other way. Then there's the man, I believe his name is Matthew Perry, who came out with a big memoir recently, once was on Friends. Drank too much, told sometimes that he was an alcoholic. He stated in his memoir that it took one person's words to the effect, again, that I suppose you could say, my words, he did the best he could. That was curative right there on the spot. There is, by the way, a psychoanalyst in the past, I believe his name is Dr. French or Dr. Alexander, I'm trying to remember the name. He called such corrective phraseology a corrective emotional experience. I might say a reframing in my own mind. Not just an experience, but a point source type of comment heard that is transformative. That's why I believe then, also, in the movie, Something's Gotta Give, Jack Nicholson is talking with another person, I'm trying to remember her name, and she says to him at one point, words to the effect, I can't figure out whether you are the first person to get me or whether you hate me. And a Dr. Gottlieb, I believe her name is, has talked extensively on YouTube and more about relationships, and she has stated her belief that understanding is the biggest thing going in relationships. Well, to be gotten, to be understood, whatever you're going to call it, my mind is for somebody to be able to tell us what we're not typically hearing, and that we cannot transcend the laws of the universe. And so if somebody doesn't like an aspect of us, and we can't easily change it if ever, and it hasn't been changed, then at least we need to realize, I think, that this is something not of what we call criminality or despicableness, laziness, whatever you're going to call this. All too often we hear, but it's simply the way it is. And this can be transformative and liberate us actually to grow far more than otherwise. Hence the person, say, who is, quote, way overweight, according to some people's standards, might find it very liberating to see just how this has happened, how they were trapped, so to speak. It's not, quote, their fault. If we're talking about resources, constraints, laws of the universe, this can be very liberating, and then, ironically, pounds can start to shed if so desired. And not a minute before. I think this ties in then too with the word self-blame. Blaming in part being in my mind, telling ourselves it could have been otherwise if only. Well, yes, if we were some kind of creature that could transcend the laws of the universe, create a rabbit out of a hat, do something they call spontaneous combustion out of nothing. I'm not even sure a creator could do that. Maybe a creator also has to follow the laws of the universe. Maybe a creator also is not a Houdini. I would close with a little humorous note. The next time we are quote-unquote criminalized by some comment, we might ask ourselves, in our own mind at least, well, how come you, in turn, don't have 10 arms and 10 legs and thus can do 10 times more? Why couldn't you do this? Are you lazy and couldn't grow 10 more or 9 more appendages on each side? In other words, 9 more sets of arms and 9 more sets of legs? Or were you constrained by the universe's laws, resources, and constraints not to be able to do so, at least not very easily, and in your own lifetime? We can then see how ludicrous it is, in one sense, to be told, you could have done this, and yet the accuser, so to speak, not doing much more than what they are, and perhaps getting by with this all too often because they have a modicum of more money, a modicum more power, a modicum more beauty, and so on. Just because they have a little more doesn't mean they couldn't have a lot more if they applied the same standards of non-cause and effect that they are applying to other people. Thoughts again.